Welcome to Food Agility 2021 Summit. My name is Mahar. I lead strategy at Food Agility CRC, and I'm just delighted to open this very important panel where we will take the insights that Gordon Cairns shared in our keynote around the rapid transformation of digital, not just at the retail end, but right through agri-food value chains. Combine that with this rise of values-based purchasing, and importantly, throw into that critical mix climate change, what it means for farmers as part of that supply chain to be resilient, and what stake they have in a future where the care about climate changes is really transforming. The role of digital and data in driving future value chains is critically important for food agility, and we really look forward to unpacking that. I'm going to be joined by some amazing panelists, starting with Gordon will continue to join us, which is terrific for Q&A. And let me add, there is a Q&A chat button at the bottom of your screen, so go ahead and start logging your questions, and we'll look forward to answering those at the end. So in addition to Gordon, on my left is Molly Harris-Olson. Molly is the CEO of Fairtrade ANZ. Previous to that, she's had many leading roles in business sustainability and was chair of the Fairtrade International Board for 6 years. In addition, we will be joined by Raphael Wood. Raph is the managing director of Market Advisory Group. For those of you that know MAG, Raph has built the key insight into carbon markets and where the supply and demand is coming over coming years, and therefore what the prices are likely to be. We're delighted that Tony Mahar is with us, and Tony, of course, is well known as the CEO of the National Farmers Federation. He has an illustrious career in business practice policy and is here to really talk about the stake that farmers have in this new world where technology, data, sustainability, biodiversity, carbon farming will have much bigger value for farmers. I'm also delighted to say that in the middle of all of that, we'll have a drop-in from Sonia Nazaretian, and Sonia is the enterprise leader for Microsoft. Microsoft is really changing the world with its climate policy, including a major commitment to purchasing nature-based offsets, and that could mean a lot for Australian farmers. So we are delighted to open now, and Molly, I guess over to you first. Following up on Gordon's point about the rise of ethical purchasing, are you picking up on that in the fair trade system here and around the world? How are people responding through COVID?
Indeed. It's been really interesting, and the research that we've seen globally is very consistent, in fact, with what Gordon shared with us. If you look at something like the Global Web Index, they surveyed people across 20 countries, and 74% of people surveyed said that in the COVID time, in all of this stress and strain over this period so far, the increasing importance of sustainability has really been high on their agenda. 74% of them said that. 41%, consistent again with Gordon's findings, was that they wanted people to be involved in sustainability in their local area. They felt they should be doing things in their local area. And 20% said that really brands right across the board need to increase again their eco-sensitive impacts. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. In terms of other research, it's interesting in Australia, there is a sense that corporations need to do more. 2/3 of people feel that not enough is being done, and that there's a very loose commitment to CSR, which often translates into a PR challenge. So I think the research is interesting. One of the most interesting numbers is that 28% of people here in Australia in the last 12 months have actually switched a purchase because of their belief in something important related to sustainability. Now that's double. It's up from 14% in 2019. So those are all, I think, really telling statistics that say that people, I think this whole crisis has enabled all of us to realize we are connected to the rest of the world. There are very real ways in which we can build the world we want, and we have choices to make.
Very good, Molly. help us to understand, you are working with farmers who really are the poorest of the poor. They live in developing country settings where, often it really is about basic livelihoods. What is Fairtrade doing to support its digital transformation right through its value chain, which of course ends up at Woolies, where those of us that buy macro, are actually eating Fairtrade product? How's that happening?
Climate neutral. Look, it's really been interesting for Fairtrade, some of these recent developments, because of course Fairtrade has been building, I would say, engineering for fair global supply chains for over 35 years. And that's a hard process. So I would say that what Fairtrade has built in a robust, transparent, and completely comprehensive visibility across supply chains in an analog system is now actually got to be transformed into a digital structure, because although the integrity is absolutely vital, we need it in real time. People want to make decisions at the cash register. They want to be able to share that. So what Fairtrade has realized, of course, one of the reasons that we work with farmers to try to make trade fair is because their access to trade is very, very challenging. So if you look at coffee farmers in the last 5 years, the commodity price of coffee that the vast majority of farmers are only getting for their commodity is only for 3 weeks in a 5-year period been at the Fairtrade minimum price that Fairtrade pays coffee farmers every single day. So we look at that sort of a structure and that sort of a situation, we realize that actually these farmers really do need help. They need more sales, they need more sales on fair terms, and they need to be able to do it in a way that also gives them power to engage with their supply chains. And digital is really the only way we see that can happen for farmers in real time. So we're working, actually it's an extremely exciting project with Food Agility, which is just an amazing opportunity for us, because Food Agility brings to us this incredible diversity of possibilities with analysis and due diligence on various technologies. They're not wedded to one or the other. They can really help us identify and understand what is going to be the best outcome for the farmers. And we've identified a partner called Ag Unity, who have designed this amazing phone. It is so robust that it's waterproof and you can drive over it with the tractor. And in contexts where where actually literacy is actually not at all universal. In fact, there's very, very low levels in many places of literacy. It's a phone that actually is specially designed for the farmers to be able to access the information they want in real time, to be able to define their boundaries, to be able to be then a bankable quantity so that they can actually get microcredit. There's amazing things that this technology can do. And what Fairtrade believes now is we've just redone our strategy to 2025. And we've identified digital transformation of these value chains for fair trade, and the right partners both in the market and with the producers across those value chains is the #1 priority, along with climate change, for really helping impact what the farmers can do, how they can grow sales, and how they can take some agency and governance control over the data that is theirs in those incredibly important value chains.
Molly, thank you so much. Gordon, let me come back to you on that. At the cash register and as consumers are buying at home, trust, I think, becomes more important, especially with digital and people really thinking about what they're buying. How do you think trust will be gained or lost as sustainability, climate change, ethical purchasing becomes more important for mainstream consumers?
Well, the truth of the matter is that if you lose the trust of your customers, they have the option of going elsewhere. And no one forces customers to come into our stores and buy our products. We don't have a society where you're forced to go and purchase from a government-owned store. So we have to earn that trust every day. And the way we do that is and it really builds on Molly's point, we are committed to radical transparency. That's the word we use, radical transparency, which is today the customer should have the information at their fingertips to enable them to decide. And if we do that, then you work on the principle that the customer is educated enough to make the right choices. Don't treat them like idiots. Treat them as if they are responsible human beings who want to do the right thing. And if we do that, then we're better together, as we say in our purpose statement. Better together. Why? Not to sell more products. Not to sell more products. We can sell more products and we can reduce our prices and we'll sell more products. But for a better tomorrow.
I cannot wait for the day when I can rock up to the Woolies checkout and actually have an experience of the farmer who produced the coffee that I just bought from Papua New Guinea in the
Well,
Highlands.
Mara, you should come to our store and buy our carbon neutral
Fairtrade.
macro product.
Thank you, Rob. I promise, Gordon.
It is.
So moving into, this segue into the rest of our panel, and we will come back. The climate issue, I think, is pretty fundamental in terms of top of mind. We had the bushfires here in Australia. We read about it every day. Ordinary consumers are really beginning to ask questions. What can they do? And boy, let me tell you what Microsoft is doing. We're going to start with a short video clip from Satya Nadella, the global CEO of Microsoft, who announced about a year ago the world's leading climate strategy. Why does it matter for us? In committing to net positive by 2030, in committing to drawing down the historical emissions across their full value chain going back to 1975 when Bill Gates founded the company, Microsoft has committed to investing billions, including in nature-based offsets right here in Australia. Our farmers will benefit from how global tech responds. Can we show the video of Satya?
The scientific consensus is clear. The world today is confronted with an urgent carbon crisis. Today we are making the commitment that by 2030, Microsoft will be carbon negative. Not just across our direct emissions, but across our supply chain too. We must take responsibility to address the carbon footprint of our own technology and company, but we will also go beyond that. By 2050, we will remove from the environment all of the carbon we have emitted directly or by electrical consumptions since our company's founding in 1975. Solving the carbon problem will require new technology. So today we are also announcing a new $1 billion climate innovation fund to accelerate the development of carbon reductions and removal technologies.
Sonia, we're so grateful that you've joined us here today. Help us to understand, the higher purpose that Microsoft is bringing to this equation and what it really means for Australian farmers.
Thanks, Mara, and it's great to be here. And as you saw in that video, we do strongly believe in that scientific consensus, hence a commitment we've made since the history of our company was formed to focus on this crisis and transition to net zero carbon emissions. I think for context, it's important to say that when we take on a new and complex societal issue such as this, we first strive to deeply learn. And then define a principled approach that really guides our efforts. And as a company, we've actually developed 7 core principles that influences each day our strategy, investments, and the partnerships that we create. So one of these that I wanted to share today is about really being grounded in both science and math, which means working at that intersection of technology and the natural and social sciences. We have a growing team of sustainability scientists working with researchers, business, government, and not-for-profit around the world to help not only ourselves, but also how our customers and partners can create this new knowledge and tools that can be scaled. Scaled so that we can better measure, manage our environmental resources, and importantly, how we mitigate risk. The other principle that I wanted to share quickly relates to investment and innovation. And as you saw in the video from Satya, we are deploying $1 billion of our own capital in this new climate innovation fund, and really designed to accelerate that development of reduction and removal technologies by investing in project finance, debt, and equity capital. Now, what's really interesting here is as we consider our investments, we actually prioritise these based on the ones that can provide a measurable effect on those 4 areas that we've defined, one being carbon, one being water, waste and ecosystems. We also prioritise based on those investments that can bring additional capital to underfunded markets, where the capital need for climate solutions is not being met today. And also ensure that developing economies and underserved communities benefit from those climate solutions. So we really want to, add incremental value to what's already being done. Now, this is part of a bigger sustainability program, which also involves really understanding, to your point, local needs and building strong partnerships both in Australia but also globally, to work with our customers and partners to really help them achieve their own climate goals. So how are we not only solving for ourselves, but how are we also supporting and enabling our customers and partners? So in Australia, we work very closely with CSIRO and really bringing that technology and natural and social sciences together in an ecosystem to support Australia's national climate ambition. On a world stage, we're part of 8 other organisations that are really showing leadership in the climate stable future. So there's a new coalition called Transform to Net Zero. And locally, we're also the founding member of the Climate Leaders Forum. And of course, in December, we signed the Carbon Pledge. So really looking at those local investments and initiatives pulling from our global position and global charter. So, I can tell you this past year, we have reduced, we've removed, we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, but we're not doing this alone. We're working very closely with our ecosystem, government, customer, partner, academia, and even our competitors to make true progress.
Sonia, that is terrific. In 30 seconds, I keep telling people this starts now. When Microsoft throws the gauntlet to global tech, and suddenly you have Amazon, Netflix, Apple, Google all in the mix, the world's response changes. Very briefly, how does that ecosystem work? How does Microsoft's leaders among that pack influence how the world now responds?
I think the first thing is to throw down the gauntlet and say we have to move away from carbon avoidance to focus on paying for carbon removal. And I think the best way you do that is by demonstrating. So, for example, we actually launched an RFP last July, where as a result of that dramatic action, we've now purchased the removal of 1.3 million metric tonnes of carbon from across 15 suppliers and 26 projects, 2 of which were in Australia. Wilmot Cattle is one specific example, which we've actually helped them improve their better cattle management practices. So, I think it's proving by example and being very clear on our intent.
Sonia, thank you so much. We are very grateful for your dropping into our panel like this. Enjoy the rest of your day, and no doubt, there will be many, many chapters to the story. So coming back then to our panelists, and Raph, I think it's fair to say that you are one of the early architects of Australia's emissions reduction fund. You've had experience with the clean energy regulator. You've also worked for Green Collar, one of our largest carbon project managers. And, more recently, you've been really the market maker, helping us to understand the economics and how the pricing on carbon and what it means for farmers. Help us to understand the economics of carbon farming. And we had this rule on this panel that we were just going to have a chat and no one could use slides, but then we decided to break that rule for Raph, because he's got some really important information to share, and go for it, Raph.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fantastic. It was great to hear from Sonia and from Gordon as well. The slides that I'll put up, that don't need to put them up immediately, just to some of the analytics that we've started to bring to the market in the last 12 to 18 months. And it's been really important to bring those images into people's minds. One of the things that follows on from something I heard Gordon say, actually the title of his presentation, which was that COVID had changed, that I think it had changed carbon markets as well. I think that the COVID experience on the back of the bushfires in Australia fundamentally changed the way Australia viewed their position in the natural ecosystem. And we started to understand how fragile the environment is, and corporates are moving regardless of political action. And that's something we've seen across the industry. And that, if I can bring up our demand curve, just quickly, it's the if you bring up that's a supply curve. We'll just come back to that in a second. This is a demand curve that we've put together based on our network of demand side clients and colleagues. And in there's the government at the bottom, and then building on top of that different compliance and different voluntary markets. The voluntary market is the second from the bottom, light blue, and then the brown. We think they are very conservative estimates because of the move we are seeing across corporates such as Microsoft. Telstra was the third largest offsetter in the world, I think, for some of the voluntary carbon units that they surrendered, and there is a definite move across corporates to take action. There's a range of demand sources in there, and this is a bottom-up demand curve, so it doesn't actually show what's needed to meet 2030, 2050 targets. This is just what we know is committed and what we can see people taking action on. And it does rise over the decade as 2030 pledges start to come in. The question around the supply that you asked, we'll pop back to that, shows the transition of certain methodologies in Australia. First instance, and this is important just to follow through what Sonia was saying around some of the capital needs not being met. Really important here is to see that the most of the supply, and this is a marginal abatement cost curve for those who haven't seen one before, volume is across the bottom and price is up the side. Apologies, you can't see the axes. But the volume that can be produced for a certain price, more volume can be produced as the price goes up. Some of those supply side, that supply side can come from avoided deforestation and avoided clearing. In Australia, we have those two methods, and that's the green one that you can see. Eventually it fades out because a lot of avoided clearing and deforestation is now being avoided by legislation. You're not allowed to clear anymore. So the potential for that minimises. But importantly, that was a CapEx, a low CapEx method. Any of those methods, you're actually not spending anything. You might even be saving money from not clearing trees. So that's a long-term cost of switching production on a farm from the loss of cattle grazing or sheep grazing potential. So you may lose some of your carrying capacity by returning to forest. In some areas, you actually may improve your net kilos per hectare. As you start to move up to the right, you start to get into those areas where you do need CapEx. And so that's in energy efficiency. But environmental plantings is another one, to build plantings for salt, to reduce salt on the soil, agricultural plantings, windbreaks, riparian zones. Those kind of plantings require CapEx. So it'd be really interesting. And they rise. And so you can only there are only a few projects that are with CapEx intensity that are viable at the current carbon price, which is around $16 for the long run marginal cost. It could go to $18.50 in the spot market. But $16 is about where it is in this long run marginal cost of a new project. As we start to get into the mid-20s, we can do a lot more environmental plantings at that price. At about $25, that's when scale starts to hit the environmental plantings methodology, or the supply from that methodology comes online. Then you're constrained by the industry's ability to actually plant the trees, and to technology. Drones are going to make it cheaper. At the moment, we're constrained by the number of people we can get on the ground to plant the trees, physically move around the country. We don't have the backpackers. We don't have the access to those itinerant workers that we have had in the past, and that's the limit. The limitation is how many trees you can plant. Also, nurseries. Nurseries have been that industry has been falling and reducing over time. So there's going to need to be some investment in producing trees. So there are a number of ways in which finance technology can help soil carbon is one where data is the key, and bringing and gathering data, collecting data, that's costly because it requires measurement. And then being able to take that data from direct measurement, say for direct measuring the soil carbon content and the change over time from different activities, and then bringing that data together, comparing it to other remote sensing data, satellite data, to get some kind of a better, much better scaled technology that's cheaper. Will bring things down the cost curve, will bring that methodology down the cost curve. So we're really excited to see what Microsoft and others in the technology space are doing to share data, gather data, and invest in the science behind soil carbon, which has an immediate and obvious effect on agricultural systems and sustainable agriculture.
Thank you so much, Raph. Did you want to talk about the price itself, or just just a general comment without any graphs, just a jet, because we're running a bit out of time?
Sure.
How will the price change? What is your bet, so that people get a sense of the market that's about to develop?
Sure. Our analytics says at the low case, with the least amount of demand and all the settings as low as they currently are in our country, that the price will move from where it is today at $16 to over $35 by the end of the decade. And that's a material increase, but it's the point to note there is that our high side analysis has it going to $50 by 2027. So depending on changes to demand, that should largely set by voluntary action or the government. Insert a comment somewhere here about the European trade and the cart border tax adjustment. We could see Australian carbon prices rocket over the next 5 to 10 years.
So just to kind of translate back into cost, if the cost of abatement is $25 or less, and with technology that gets cheaper and cheaper, and the price could be $50 or more, there's a bit of profit ahead, right, for those regional communities, those farmers that have been through the drought and beyond. So just wanted to capture that and now bring Tony Mahar in. But before doing that, let's go to an audience poll. And we're asking the specific question, by 2030, what percentage of farm revenue will be from ecosystem services? And that includes carbon offsets, biodiversity, other stewardship programs. What does the audience think is possible in terms of percentage of farm revenue? And as that poll is kind of coming through, and I'm actually not sure when the answer comes up, so that's very exciting. We'll all be surprised by that. And the poll is now open, so maybe we'll report back on the answer as that comes through. Tony, what does this all mean for farmers? You know, and really, what do they need to capitalize on this emerging kind of market that feels to me a bit like, you know, the .com thing as it was building its head of steam?
Yeah, thanks, Mara, and thanks for the opportunity to take part. Look, it means potentially, as you say, a huge amount of income and opportunity for farmers to become more resilient, to de-risk in some ways their business, because we know that agriculture is one of the most volatile industries in Australia. So the more certainty we can have, and that's another key principle that I'd identify, is we actually need certainty, and a couple of the previous speakers have talked about data and availability of data and methodologies and the investment that is required to actually get that. That's what farmers need. So farmers, you know, make decisions every day based on, you know, variable situations, variable climates and variable environments. So you know, farmers will adapt and farmers will take up new technology if it's there, if there's co-investment, if there's certainty. I mean, farmers are business people at the end of the day, and all business people are looking for certainty. So farmers are already engaging in the system in terms of, you know, things like the emissions reduction fund. The more certainty we can get from business, the more certainty we can get from government, then it can potentially mean additional revenue sources for farmers, and that means additional security, additional resilience, and additional risk management.
Thank you so much, Tony. And I think we're entering this world where the Europeans are now defining standards on green bonds that will make it really possible to measure how capital can flow through and end up with farmers in those projects. So I'm really optimistic. We've heard a lot about carbon, carbon markets, soil carbon. What about biodiversity? I believe NFF is also leading some important trials in that area. What's going to happen there?
That's right, and I hope all the people online are voting for 5% of the farm gate value to be delivered by ecosystem services. That's the target we've set ourselves, so it'd be great if everyone got on board and supported that. So about a $20 billion industry we think it can be if we get to farm gate value of $100 billion by 2030. So obviously there is a lot of work that needs to be done in that space, and we are leading a program that is right now bringing together some of the existing standards, because the last thing we want to do as a farmer body is to have, another layer of certification or verification or system on farm. Farmers are already overloaded with red tape. So what we're trying to do is bring together the existing systems and to make some sort of meta standard that will go into a biodiversity system, underpin it, because metrics and measurement are absolutely critical. And to get that standardised across the country takes a lot of work. So we are leading a bit of a program to bring together what standards are there. Importantly, where the money is, because we've seen, organisations like Microsoft and others demonstrate that there is capital there to invest in these markets, but we've got to actually define what that market looks like. So again, there's some standardisation and there's some certainty for business. So that's the other key part of the project that we're doing is, in a way, show me the money, show me where the money is, show us how it's going to flow and show how farmers can engage in it. So we do think that there's a huge amount of value in that. We want to reward, recognise and remunerate farmers for what they've been doing and also what they can do going forward, because that's where the real gains, I think, are going to be made.
Thank you so much, Tony. And I think you're going to be happy to learn the outcomes of our poll. Because only 4% of the audience thought zero additional income would accrue on environmental services. 29% thought 2% of farm revenue. 44% thought it would be 5%. And then there's another 23% that think you're conservative, Tony. They think it could even be 10%. So we're very engaged around this as an audience. And I guess right on time, we're now in that part of our panel where we're taking questions from the audience. And I have some served up for me now, which I guess I'll start with Gordon. And Gordon, there's an interesting question here that came from your original keynote into this session. This is from Stuart Martin, who's wondering what lessons you've learned from the pandemic that could help with issues around climate change, land degradation, all kinds of supply chain risks.
Well, I'm going to make an observation here which might be a little controversial, which is I don't think emissions reduction and climate change is necessarily a cost-benefit analysis. So at Woolworths, we have a principle which says, do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And you only get tested in doing that when you have a crisis. So for example, when we had COVID, we basically said, the safety of our customers and our staff is the most important thing, no matter what it costs. No matter what it costs. We didn't sit down and say, this is going to cost us $640 million, which it has cost us to date. Therefore, let's see what the return is on our $640 million. We said, do it whatever it costs. So when it comes to climate reduction, we haven't sat down and said, well, I wonder whether we'll get a return on putting solar panels on the roof. We know we will. We wonder whether we'll get a return on putting LED lighting in all of our stores. We know we will. That's not the reason why we're doing it. The reason why we're doing it is we have signed up for the Paris Accord. We have signed up for 2050 or sooner net carbon positive. Why? Because it's the right thing to do.
Fantastic. I'm going to follow that up with a question from Stephanie Camarena, which I think is really, really important for us to grapple with. I'm actually going to take the liberty of starting to answer the first bit, and then Molly, the second bit is for you. So Stephanie asks, don't you think there's something really unfair in the expectation that farmers will have to pay for tracking and monitoring data on their property when it is in the national interest? Now, she goes on to ask, also that means for smallholder farmers, they'll have less access to capital and be left behind. And I'm going to turn that on its head because there is a part of this program that we call AgTech Alley. You will find there 10 to 15 technology companies which, if we are going to succeed in turning the dial on climate change, they must succeed because they are developing the tools and technologies that will greatly reduce the cost of measuring carbon. They will allow a farmer to use software, regular farm management software they're already using, to integrate through APIs data that then flows through to being able to participate in those markets. And I'm thinking of companies like AgriWeb, AgriDigital, LumaChain, many that are featured further in the presentation. So, Stephanie, we are hopeful that the cost will actually be greatly reduced. And if it isn't, this market will never scale up. And interestingly, Molly, I think we're thinking the same around technology to increase access to capital for smallholder farmers.
Exactly. Because if you've actually got farmers connected to these opportunities, connected digitally with a technology they can use, all of a sudden they have direct information. They can share information. And we actually think that somewhere between 3 and 10 times the volume of sales will actually happen for farmers. And while my colleague and friend here, Gordon, isn't so worried about sales, I can tell you farmers need to sell their products. Especially poor farmers. So I can say that the way we measure things is, in fact, through how much volume, how much are they selling. And we believe that this digital transformation is going to enable them to have access to sales that they never had before. But also we hope that that technology will also help them be able to use the best science that they can on their farms to make sure they're doing everything they can to sequester the carbon, to hopefully also benefit from that income stream. If we can help them benefit from income streams from sequestered carbon, I think that's an additional support to them. But it is a great opportunity, and we believe it's well within reach of these farmers if we can support them.
And you know, in the project that Food Agility is developing with Fairtrade, the AgUnity phone and platform will allow farmers for the first time to have a unique identifier, their identifier. Exactly. They will control and own their data. They will have a geomap of their farm by walking around and capturing the perimeters.
Yep.
They will have a digital, very intuitive record-keeping system. Those are the 3 ingredients of access to capital. A unique ID, a track record on income and expenditure, and a geomap. Yep. So it can change the world of smallholder farming. Very exciting.
There's a self-evident point here, which is if you don't measure it, you can't manage it.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, the reason why it's so important is by measuring it, you manage it, and you get into that productivity improvement loop.
Correct.
And oh, by the way, I just wanted to come back and say, we are interested in sales and profits. This is not a charity we're running.
Very good. Good that we've clarified from the chair of the board. It is not a charity. We have a question from the brilliant Emma Leonard, who is one of our researchers. And Emma is asking, and Raph, I think this question is to you, and possibly also might involve Tony, because it's an important one at the heart of carbon farming. Emma's asking, can we talk about what happens at the end of a 25-year, or even if I want to break a 100-year contract? You know, in order to participate in farmer markets, the trust has to go both ways. Raph, what is the issue around breaking contracts that you've made to sell into voluntary private markets?
It's a good question. The issue there is almost specific to vegetation, where you're either avoiding clearing a paddock, or you are planting trees in that paddock. It isn't permanent if you then knock it down after 25 years. And one of the very few carbon principles that are all oversee the markets are that it must be permanent. And so if you're going to clear the trees in year 26 of a 25-year permanence project, you're not doing the right thing, as Gordon would say. It is possible the year after your project ends, but that'll probably depend on your state allowing you to clear once it's already reached forest. But to go to the question of breaking the contract, breaking that commitment, if you decide halfway through a project that you halfway through the 25 years of a project, you don't want to do it anymore. Something has occurred that you don't want to do it. You want to stop that project. You won't get any more carbon credits from that point on if you just leave it how it is. Actually, if you leave it how it is, you may even still get some. But if you decide to then clear the trees or cut the trees down, or even some of those at that area, you'll need to repay through getting other carbon credits and surrendering them to the government, any carbon credits that you've been issued. So if you've been issued 100 carbon credits, at the point you decide to cancel the project, you'll have to find 100 credits and give them back. That's a natural principle of permanence. But economically, there'll be many reasons to do it. A mining operation that might take up 100 hectares of your land on a big, large-scale property, that's not going to be to go and buy 100 to go and buy the credits back and give them to the government isn't going to be financially detrimental to that mine because it's a very small cost in the scheme of things. So it shouldn't limit opportunity. But if you're going to start a carbon project that's going to revegetate, you should be committed to it.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Look, we have just a minute or so left, and Tony, I have a question for you, actually, just to cap this off. You know, NFF has just announced a $66 billion year on that roadway to $100 billion of farm value, and that $34 billion gap in your roadmap to 2030. It's interesting. If you think of carbon projects and their revenue equivalent, it's kind of like, you know, say there's a 5% margin in profitability for a typical farm. You know, a lot in the drought have been very stressed. When you think about that equation, 1.7 billion in carbon or biodiversity revenue is equivalent to 34 billion in producing more. Might you have a faster roadmap if you really turn the dial on stewardship?
I hope so. Yes, we need to find that in time's getting away, 9 years or so to find $34 billion. So technology, I think, Mahar, is going to be the key and the certainty there. So yes, we'd love to get it started as soon as we can. And this is about choices for farmers and options for farmers, really. So if we get the technology and the methodologies right and the certainty, farmers will have a crack at it. Don't worry about that.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. That brings our panel to a close. It's been a pleasure.